There's a particular kind of person who exists in this world quietly, almost invisibly. They don't attend every gathering, they don't fill their calendar with social obligations, they don't feel the need to be surrounded by people constantly. And yet, when you look closely, you'll notice something unusual. They're not sad. They're not desperate for connection. They're not waiting for someone to rescue them from isolation. They're simply content. This isn't loneliness, it's something entirely different. It's a state of being that most people misunderstand, and some even fear. Because in a world that equates solitude with sadness, these individuals have discovered something rare: the ability to be alone without feeling lonely. But what creates this psychology? What separates someone who craves constant company from someone who finds peace in their own presence? The answer is more complex than most people realize, and it reveals something profound about human nature, self-awareness, and the art of internal fulfillment: music. Let's start with a fundamental distinction that changes everything. Loneliness and solitude are not the same thing. Loneliness is an emotional state, a feeling of emptiness that occurs when you crave connection but don't have it. It's the ache of wanting to be understood, seen, or accompanied, yet finding yourself isolated instead. Solitude, however, is a choice. It's the deliberate act of spending time alone, not because you have to, but because you want to. And people who are alone but never lonely have mastered this difference. They've learned that being by themselves doesn't mean being abandoned. It means being selective. It means choosing quality over quantity. It means understanding that sometimes the most meaningful company you can have is your own. This mindset doesn't develop randomly. It's shaped by specific psychological patterns, life experiences, and a particular way of relating to the world. And once you understand these patterns, you begin to see why certain people not only tolerate solitude, they actually thrive in it. One of the most defining traits of people who are comfortable alone is their high level of self-awareness. They've spent significant time understanding themselves, their thoughts, emotions, triggers, desires, and boundaries. This isn't surface-level self-knowledge, it's deep introspection, the kind that comes from sitting with uncomfortable feelings instead of distracting yourself from them. Most people avoid being alone because silence forces them to confront things they'd rather ignore. Unresolved emotions, regrets, fears, questions about their identity and purpose. But people who embrace solitude have already walked through that discomfort. They've faced their inner landscape, made peace with it, and emerged with a clarity that others rarely achieve. This self-awareness creates something powerful: internal stability. They don't need external validation to feel whole because they've built a sense of worth from within. Their mood doesn't depend on how many messages they receive or how many invitations they get. Their sense of identity isn't tied to being part of a group. They know who they are, and that knowledge becomes their anchor. But there's another layer to this. People who are alone but not lonely often possess what psychologists call high internal locus of control. This means they believe their happiness, fulfillment, and emotional state are primarily determined by their own actions and mindset, not by external circumstances or other people. When someone with a high internal locus of control feels dissatisfied, they don't wait for others to fix it. They take responsibility for creating the life they want. If they feel bored, they find something meaningful to engage with. If they feel disconnected, they deepen their relationship with themselves. They don't outsource their emotional well-being to social interactions because they've learned that sustainable happiness comes from within. This is radically different from how most people operate. Many individuals unconsciously believe that other people are responsible for making them feel good through attention, approval, entertainment, or companionship. And when those external sources disappear, they feel empty. But people who thrive in solitude have shifted that dependency inward. They've become their own source of emotional nourishment. Now, this doesn't mean they're emotionally detached or incapable of connection. In fact, it's often the opposite. People who are comfortable being alone tend to form deeper, more meaningful relationships when they do connect with others, because they're not seeking connection out of desperation or neediness. They're choosing it intentionally. They value quality conversations over small talk. They prefer a few close friendships over a large network of acquaintances. They don't fear being misunderstood because they've already understood themselves. There's also a creative dimension to this psychology. Solitude provides space for deep thinking, reflection, and imagination. Many of history's greatest thinkers, artists, writers, and innovators were people who spent extensive time alone. Not because they were antisocial, but because solitude allowed their minds to wander, explore, and create without interruption. When you're constantly surrounded by people, your thoughts are influenced by external voices. Opinions, expectations, social dynamics, all of these shape how you think and what you believe. But in solitude, those influences fade. You're left with your raw, unfiltered thoughts. And for people who are comfortable alone, this isn't frightening. It's liberating. It's where their most authentic ideas emerge. They become comfortable with silence. Not awkward silence, but peaceful silence. The kind where nothing needs to be said because nothing is missing. They can sit in a room by themselves for hours, reading, thinking, creating, or simply existing and feel perfectly satisfied. This ability to be present with themselves without needing stimulation or distraction is something most people struggle to achieve. But let's address the misconception that often surrounds these individuals. Society tends to view people who prefer solitude with suspicion. They're labeled as antisocial, lonely, depressed, or even strange. There's an unspoken assumption that something must be wrong with someone who doesn't constantly seek social interaction. But the truth is, there's nothing inherently wrong with preferring solitude. It's simply a different way of being. Introversion, introspection, and independence aren't disorders, they're personality traits. And people who are alone but not lonely have stopped apologizing for their nature. They've stopped forcing themselves into social situations that drain them just to appear normal. They've given themselves permission to exist in a way that feels authentic to them. There's another crucial element to their psychology: emotional independence. They don't rely on others to regulate their emotions. If they feel anxious, they've developed internal coping mechanisms: journaling, meditation, creative expression, physical activity. If they feel sad, they sit with that sadness and process it, rather than immediately seeking distraction through social interaction. This emotional self-sufficiency doesn't mean they never need support. It means they've learned to distinguish between genuine need and habitual dependence. They can reach out when necessary, but they don't outsource their emotional processing to others as a default response. This creates a paradox that many people find confusing. These individuals can appear incredibly self-reliant and independent, yet when they do form connections, they're often deeply loyal, empathetic, and present. They're not emotionally unavailable, they're emotionally selective. They invest their energy intentionally rather than scattering it across superficial interactions. There's also a philosophical dimension to this way of being. People who are comfortable alone often develop a relationship with existence itself. They find meaning in simple things like a sunrise, a good book, a quiet walk, the process of learning something new. They don't need grand experiences or constant novelty to feel alive. They've learned to extract richness from ordinary moments. This ability to find contentment in simplicity is increasingly rare in a world obsessed with productivity, achievement, and external validation. But for those who have cultivated it, life becomes less about filling emptiness and more about appreciating fullness. They're not lonely because they've learned that presence, true mindful presence, can be its own form of companionship. Let's also consider how past experiences shape this psychology. Many people who are comfortable alone went through periods where they had no choice but to be by themselves. Maybe they grew up in environments where they learned early that relying on others felt unpredictable or unsafe. Maybe they experienced betrayal, disappointment, or abandonment that taught them the value of self-reliance. But rather than becoming bitter or fearful, they transformed that experience into strength. They learned that people can enrich your life, but they shouldn't define it. They discovered that the most stable foundation you can build is the one within yourself. And once that foundation is solid, being alone stops feeling like a void and starts feeling like a sanctuary. There's also a protective element to this preference for solitude. People who are alone but not lonely have often experienced the exhaustion that comes from maintaining relationships that don't align with their values or energy. They've sat through conversations that felt hollow. They've participated in social dynamics that felt performative. They've realized that quantity of connection doesn't equal quality of experience. So they've become selective. They've set boundaries. They've learned to say no to invitations that don't genuinely interest them. And rather than feeling guilty about this, they've embraced it as self-respect. They've stopped pretending to enjoy things they don't, stopped forcing connections that feel one-sided, and stopped sacrificing their peace for the sake of appearing.